I wanted to talk about tone when you're running D&D games, and really, basically any tabletop game or any kind of interactive storytelling where part of the tone of the thing that you're trying to make is dependent on the response of the people playing that game or participating in your art. So a lot of people, a lot of DMs, and a lot of players even make jokes and stuff, and sometimes even complaints about the tones of their games. One of the classic D&D memes is the image of the Fellowship subcaption, how the party started, and then it cuts over to Monty Python and said how it's going. Um, and that's what a lot of people experience with their games, is a sort of degradation of the serious tone that they started off with. Um, and a lot of people kind of come in and point out that, if your party is having more fun being silly playing the game than they were being serious playing the game, then what you have is the opposite of a problem. And I completely agree with that. But a lot of the time, you have DMs, especially, who have a more serious story that they want to tell, and they feel kind of roadblocked because their serious story doesn't really seem to fit in with the more zany actions of their players. And a lot of them wonder, how do I make my players engage with the more serious elements of my story? How do I, capture them and sort of direct their energy towards the more serious elements of my game? And the first thing that you can do here is figure out what player expectations are. If you want to run a game that is tonally identical to some other, piece of art or, whatever, try and get your players to sit down and consume that art as part of a group project. You know, watch Lord of the Rings. It's been make that session zero. Hey guys, I'm gonna put my next campaign in Middle Earth. Let's binge through, the Fellowship, and then start playing. Um, and that's one way that you can sort of onboard everybody. You get everybody in that mood, in that mindset. They figure out kind of ahead of time what's expected of them by doing that. Another thing that I'm sure a lot of people have noticed is that their players and DMs are running games like Critical Role or any one of the dozens of other D&D podcasts that are out there. And that's actually part of the reason why I haven't watched any of those, is that I know it will affect the way I run D&D. It affects the way everybody runs their game when they consume a piece of art that is so close to the game. It will influence the way you think about things. And I like the way I run D&D. I like the way I think about D&D. I actually really do enjoy the bits of Critical Role that I have seen, but I don't want to necessarily change the way I run D&D. And I kind of think that there's a benefit to having a sort of more rare flavor, because there are a lot of people who are running Critical Role-esque Dungeons and Dragons. The other major thing you can do to try and salvage tonality in your game is meeting your players where they're at. If your players want to be very silly, it's easy enough to say, all right, I can't just start off with a very serious plot hook and expect them to take it seriously. You need to indulge the silliness. Give them a dumb character that they want to latch onto, and it might not always, work the first time, but give them something to engage them. Give them something to care about. Recently, I had a party basically looked like they were walking into another shopping episode, as we call them, where it's just a session that, despite our best efforts, is going to take up most of the session with people going through the paces of finding items that they want to buy and then purchasing them from shopkeepers. And what usually happens is one or two people in the party will have a laundry list of things that they're trying to find and trying to figure out if they can get their hands on. Sometimes it's magic items that, I don't want to necessarily say, yeah, you can pick up all of the magic items that you want to get. I need to figure out what do I want to give them, what do I want to make sort of as a reward for completing a quest. So we can't just hand wave and say, all right, you're able to go into town and buy everything. I need to look over and kind of think about all of the things that are being purchased. And what tends to happen is a lot of people at the table will lean back, pop out a phone, and check out. And that's not good for your D&D game if you want to be able to bring everybody back at the end of, that shopping trip and get right into, a plot hook so that you can pick up right in the meaty bit next week. Which is what I at least try to do sometimes with the shopping episodes, is it's kind of get things moving so that when we pick up next week, it's like, okay, yeah, last week was kind of boring, but we've got a cliffhanger, we know where we're going next time. And the tool that I used at that point was the Evil Lair Emporium, something that I kind of pulled right out of my ass on the spot, but it was like a burning question that somehow wormed its way into my brain. It's, where do villains who have these layers with all of these really kind of cliched items, the gigantic tapestries and, spike pits and various traps, where do they get them? A lot of these villains aren't necessarily the most industrious type. They need to be purchasing these things from somewhere. And so I had the party find the store that sells it all, including, a contact list for classically trained henchmen that you can hire to be part of your dungeon. This is where you get referred to your personal Igor. And it really worked. It engaged the players. The people who were starting to check out on their phones were all of a sudden intrigued with what was going on at, this store, and all of a sudden it went from like two of the characters were out shopping and everybody else was just going to stay back at the base and, kind of sit this one out, to everybody was there. Everybody was participating. Everybody wanted to walk around and talk to this ridiculously accented merchant selling diabolical devices and traps and decorations, blood fountains and all sorts of ridiculous things that you can put in an evil lair. The party doesn't have an evil lair, but it was just hilarious to go and look through and go, oh, this is where that's from. This is where they're getting it. It filled in a corner of the lore of the universe that nobody had realized at that point was even a question that could be asked. And at the end, a player who was totally checked out from the story otherwise left with a brand new magic item. A bat rope. An otherwise normal rope that when pulled summons a swarm of bats. You don't control them. They're not particularly aggressive unless you somehow trap them in a corner. They just try and fly out of there because they're bats and they want nothing to do with the situation you just pop them into. But it's fun. And using that tool to make sure that everybody was engaged, everybody was on topic, and everybody was focused on the game meant that I could transition immediately into whatever story beat I was trying to hit afterwards, because I already had everybody's attention. Everybody already knew what was going on. And you can do the same thing with characters. Put a silly character in your campaign that meets the player's energy right at their level. Is exactly the kind of foil that they want for their goofy shenanigans. And then when you have some big important plot hook, make that like deeply important to this goofy character. And they're already going to be paying attention to that little goofball. They're probably going to be invested in their continued survival. And so, if that hinges on the party getting involved in something that ordinarily they would just go, not my problem, and fuck off to the next town to continue with their shenanigans, well, now they're hooked. Now they want to know. Because if they don't do anything, the cost is that their favorite little goofball in the game disappears. And ultimately, getting players involved is about giving them something to care about. And your players aren't always going to care about the politics from some made-up land that you invented several months ago because you were bored. But they will care about the NPCs that they've spent time talking to and joking with. So, in short, yeah, don't be afraid to meet your players on their level, and it will make it much easier to bring them to the place that you want them to be for your story. But also keep in mind that if your players really want to run a silly game, give it to them. You can't always get the serious campaign you want, but if you try hard and you've got at least somewhat decent players, you can have a fun one, and that's what's most important.